The ship's engines died with a groan. A sickening, metallic shriek that reverberated through every compartment. Dorian Holt's hand slammed against the control console, but the screen went blank before he could register anything. Panic surged in his veins, but he forced it down. This wasn't the first time he'd been in a situation like this. It wouldn't be the last. The station's artificial gravity flickered, then failed completely. Dorian's stomach dropped as he floated, his body weightless in the dead silence of the command center. A voice crackled through his earpiece. Crackling was static but unmistakable. "Dorian, do you copy?" It was Commander Kale's voice. The man who had abandoned him. The voice that once gave orders he followed without question. "I'm here," Dorian replied through gritted teeth. He floated toward the console, pulling himself closer to the monitor with a slight push off the wall. He barely made it before the feed flickered back on, showing the face of the commander. Kale's eyes were narrowed, his expression unreadable. "Status report, engineer," Kale ordered, his voice cold. "Shields are down. Life support is failing." Dorian's voice shook, despite his best efforts to mask it. "We're going to lose the whole station if I can't get the auxiliary systems online." "Then fix it." The command came like a slap. Dorian bit back the anger rising in his chest. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the failure of the station or the realization that the commander wasn't going to help him. Dorian's fingers moved automatically, his mind already calculating the steps needed to restore basic operations. He had always been the fix-it guy, the one who could make the broken functional. But this was different. This was an alien invasion on a level humanity hadn't seen before, and it was only a matter of time before the Xal'gar Empire found their way to Station Valus. "Do we have an evac plan?" Dorian asked, his tone low. The thought gnawed at him. What was the point of fixing it if they were just going to get slaughtered the moment the shields went down? "No," Kale answered curtly, no hesitation. "We've been left behind. The rest of the fleet's already mobilized. You're on your own, Holt. Fix it or we're all dead." Dorian's chest tightened. Alone. He had been abandoned by his own people, thrown into the fire with nothing but his tools. And now the clock was ticking. The Xal'gar had already decimated the fleet. Humanity's last holdout was Station Valus, and Dorian had no illusions left. He wasn't getting out of this. The station was silent as a grave, a testament to the wreckage of war. The main hallway was dark, illuminated only by the eerie glow of malfunctioning lights, casting long, jagged shadows along the walls. Machinery hummed in the distance, broken and sputtering, as though the station was on its last breath. Every step Dorian took echoed, a reminder that this was no longer the place he had once trusted to protect humanity's last remnants. He pulled his toolkit from the back of his belt, fingers running over the familiar tools as he moved to the station's central reactor. The pipes were overheated, and a faint smell of burning wires filled the air. His palms were slick as he removed the panel, exposing the frail guts of the reactor. But it wasn't just the system that was failing, it was his hope. His hope that he would somehow be able to fix this in time. A small monitor blinked at him, a blinking red light indicating the auxiliary power grid was malfunctioning. Great. Just great. Dorian gritted his teeth, grabbing a wire cutter and a soldering tool. The pressure of time was bearing down on him now, making every movement feel heavier, more urgent. He worked quickly, rewiring and reassembling, his mind buzzing with calculations, constantly running through solutions and backup plans. Every minute mattered, but the more he worked, the more the realization set in. This wasn't just a repair job anymore. He was the last line of defense for humanity. And the idea that he'd been left here to die, abandoned by his own fleet, didn't sit well with him. It should have burned him. It should have made him furious, but instead, a cold numbness settled in his chest. He wasn't going to die alone. Not like this. "Commander, I need reinforcements," Dorian called into the comms, his voice rough. There was a long pause before the static-filled reply came through. "Not possible," Kale responded, his voice distant. "We've made our decision. You're on your own." Dorian exhaled, his heart pounding. He gripped the edge of the console hard enough to make his knuckles crack. Alone. He moved back to the main hall, taking a deep breath as he pushed through the silence. The corridors seemed endless now, stretching out in all directions, their purpose lost. His only mission was survival. Repair the core, keep the station running, buy humanity a few more hours, maybe days, before the Xal'gar arrived. But as he rounded the corner to the reactor's secondary maintenance shaft, something caught his eye. It wasn't the typical flashing warning or malfunctioning part. No. It was a piece of equipment. An old piece of equipment, buried beneath a pile of debris. Dorian knelt down, peeling away the debris until a familiar shape emerged, a combat-grade AI module. It was a relic of a previous war, small, compact, and highly dangerous if reprogrammed. Dorian's pulse quickened. The Xal'gar hadn't just destroyed the fleet. They had destroyed everything. But this? This could change the tide. This module wasn't just a piece of junk, it was a weapon. A weapon he could use. His fingers brushed the metal, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. If he could integrate the AI into the station's systems, reprogram it to create a defensive grid, he could potentially turn the station into a fortress. The Xal'gar had underestimated humanity. They'd underestimated him. The weight of the decision settled on him. He could fix the systems. He could repair the infrastructure. But this would be different. This wasn't about just keeping the station running, it was about using what little he had left to fight back. Dorian straightened up, the module in hand. He could feel the spark of something old and powerful within him ignite. The engineer inside him understood the machine. The man inside him understood the stakes. And for the first time since his betrayal, Dorian felt something resembling hope. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Let's see what you can really do, old friend." ###cliffhanger ending asterisk. The comms crackled again, cutting through the silence like a blade. "This is Commander Kale. Dorian, listen carefully." The tone was different now, urgent, almost afraid. "The Xal'gar have breached our outer perimeter. We need you. We're not going to make it without you. Fix it now." Dorian held the module in his hand. The station's systems hummed as the first wave of alien ships filled the void. And then, from the depths of the station, came a single thought: this is not the end. With a sharp intake of breath, Dorian activated the AI. "Let's turn this station into a weapon," he whispered. And then, everything changed. The cold hum of the station's power systems vibrated beneath Dorian Holt's feet as he worked tirelessly. The AI module sat beside him on a steel workbench, its lights blinking sporadically, like it was trying to wake up from a long, unwanted slumber. Dorian's fingers danced over the control panel as the mainframe rebooted for the third time. His mind raced, constantly analyzing, constantly troubleshooting. He had less than an hour before the Xal'gar forces reached Station Valus. He had to be ready. The station's core was barely functional, and life support was running on fumes. But the AI? The AI was his ace in the hole. If he could reprogram it to interface with the station's defensive grid, he might stand a chance. He inserted a data crystal into the AI module, activating the communication link. A faint whirring noise filled the room as the system booted up. Dorian watched the screen as the code flashed before his eyes, streams of information racing past too fast for a casual observer, but not fast enough for someone like Dorian. Every line was his responsibility now. The stakes were too high. "You've got one shot at this," Dorian muttered to himself, running his fingers through his short, disheveled hair. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mixing with the grime of days spent in isolation. His hands shook, but his mind was laser-focused. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about fighting back. The AI was slow to respond, its voice clicking through static. "Initializing. Systems. Online." Dorian leaned forward, muttering. "No time for delays. You better be good. Accessing available data, identifying threat. Xal'gar forces detected. Authorization required for hostile engagement." "Hostile engagement, huh?" Dorian grinned bitterly. I think I can authorize that. The AI was taking too long. It was still calculating, still figuring out its options. Time wasn't on his side. Dorian ripped open a compartment and yanked out a few circuits, his heart racing. The glow from the control panel illuminated the darkness around him, casting sharp shadows that made the room feel even more claustrophobic. A red warning flashed on the screen. Warning, system overload imminent. Dorian cursed under his breath. The power grid wasn't holding up. He needed to divert more resources to the mainframe to give the AI more processing power. But that meant pulling from critical areas of the station: life support, communications, weapons systems. Every system was already stretched thin. He was gambling. Again. Come on, he whispered, forcing his fingers to move faster. Sweat dripped from his brow as he reworked the power lines, rerouting resources to the AI. Each key press felt like a gamble, a chance that could either save or doom him. The station groaned as the systems shifted, struggling to adjust to the pressure. The entire frame vibrated under the weight of every decision he made. Dorian knew if this didn't work, it wasn't just the station that would fail, it would be humanity's last chance at survival. The AI's voice broke through the tension. Connection established. Activating defensive systems. Engaging. The ground beneath him jolted as the station's external weapons systems powered up. Dorian's heart skipped. The systems were responding. He had done it. Dorian? A voice crackled through his comms, cutting through the brief moment of relief. It was Commander Kale again. Dorian clenched his jaw, his anger rising. Dorian, we need those defenses up now. The Xal'gar are closing in. Dorian slammed his fist into the workbench, his knuckles white. I know, Kale. I'm working on it. But I need time. The silence on the other end was palpable. Finally, Kale spoke again, his voice quieter. We'll hold them off for as long as we can. Do your part. We're depending on you. Dorian didn't respond. He didn't need to. The weight of Kale's words, the pressure, the trust, the betrayal, all of it hung in the air like a heavy fog. If the station didn't hold, there would be no reinforcements, no backup. Humanity would die here, with nothing to show for it but the ashes of its failed resistance. He shifted back to the AI, his hands moving in a blur. The exterior guns powered up as a series of blips appeared on his console. A network of Xal'gar ships had entered the station's firing range. They were here. Dorian's finger hovered over the launch button for the station's primary defense cannons. He didn't hesitate. Firing. The station's turrets came to life, their rounds tearing into the incoming fleet. The station rattled under the force of the blasts, but it was holding. The AI was doing its job. Dorian allowed himself a brief exhale, but his moment of relief was short-lived. A new problem was flashing on his screen. Energy levels critical. Shields cannot withstand sustained fire. Dorian cursed. The shields were already failing, and now the weapons systems were draining everything they had left. The Xal'gar were coming in waves. They'd break through if he didn't do something. The comms crackled again, and this time it wasn't Kale. It was a woman's voice, sharp with urgency. Dorian, it's Lieutenant Varys. The shield generators are under attack. We need help down here now. A cold rush swept over him. His mind snapped into action. Varys, hold on, he ordered. I'm rerouting power to the shields. You'll have a few minutes, but it won't last long. He wasn't sure if she heard him, but he didn't wait for a response. His hands moved faster now, bypassing the overloaded systems and rerouting every spare watt of energy he could find to the shield generators. The AI was holding its end of the bargain, but it couldn't do everything. Not on its own. Dorian was going to have to do the rest. The tension in the air grew as the last of the station's outer defenses fired into space, striking at the oncoming Xal'gar ships. But Dorian knew deep down that the battle was far from over. The shields were barely holding, the weapons systems were draining too quickly, and the station was beginning to show signs of catastrophic failure. He needed more time. Then, a loud alarm blared. Breach detected. Core overload imminent. Panic set in. The auxiliary systems were overloaded. The Xal'gar were pushing too hard, and the station was buckling. It wasn't enough. Damn it! Dorian cursed, slamming his fist into the console. We need more power now. He looked at the AI, which had gone silent for a moment, processing new data. Then, it spoke again. Recalculating. Altering core distribution. Redirecting power to shield generators. The light on the console shifted, and Dorian held his breath. The AI wasn't just activating the systems, it was adapting, thinking, learning. He could feel the tide shift. The station wasn't going to die today. Not without a fight. Cliffhanger ending asterisk. But just as the shields regained partial strength, a massive explosion rocked the station. The lights flickered again, and the entire structure groaned as if it were on the verge of collapse. A new warning flashed across the screen. Multiple breaches detected. Reactor core stability, 15%. Dorian's eyes widened. If the reactor went critical, it was over for them all. In that moment, Dorian realized the real fight wasn't over the station, it was for everything that humanity still had left to fight for. And if he failed, there would be no second chances. He had one last decision to make. The station trembled under another explosion, a bone-rattling shudder that sent sparks flying from the overhead conduits. Dorian Holt's heart slammed against his chest as he clung to the console, the glowing readouts flickering ominously. The station was a dying animal, bleeding out from every wound it had suffered since the Xal'gar arrived. But it wasn't dead yet. And neither was he. Status? Dorian's voice was low, barely more than a rasp as he stared at the screen. The reactor's core stability had dropped from 15% to 10%. At this rate, they had minutes before a catastrophic meltdown. Core stabilization, unstable. The AI responded, its voice smooth yet undeniably urgent. Immediate action required to prevent catastrophic failure. Tell me something I don't know. Dorian muttered under his breath. His fingers flew across the control panel, rerouting power, reconfiguring protocols, but the station was no longer cooperating. Each command seemed to bring him closer to failure, like a sinking ship trying to keep its course. Suddenly, the doors to the command center slammed open. Lieutenant Varys entered, her breath ragged, her uniform torn and bloodied. She had the look of someone who had been in the thick of a battle for too long. Her eyes were wide, and the panic in them made Dorian's stomach drop. They're in the lower levels, Varys said, her voice strained but resolute. The Xal'gar, they've broken through. We can't hold them off for much longer. Dorian's hands paused over the console. For a moment, the weight of their situation crashed down on him. The reactor was minutes from detonating, and now, with the Xal'gar on their doorstep, his options were dwindling. There was no cavalry coming. The fleet was gone. The station, humanity's last hope, was on the brink of total destruction. Dorian, we need a plan now. Varys' voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to her, feeling the cold steel of resolve settle in his gut. He had one chance left. One desperate, reckless chance. If he could stabilize the core and turn the station into a defensive fortress, maybe they could still buy humanity enough time to regroup. But it wouldn't be easy. And it wouldn't be without cost. Get to the lower levels, Dorian said, his tone sharp. I'm going to stabilize the core. You buy me time. Hold them off as long as you can. Varys shook her head. I can't do this alone. You're not alone, Dorian said, his voice low. The station's AI is online, and I'm going to make sure it fights back. We'll hold them off together. Just give me those few minutes. Varys stared at him for a long beat, her expression a mixture of disbelief and begrudging respect. Finally, she nodded. All right, Holt. Don't make me regret this. The moment the doors slammed shut behind her, Dorian returned his focus to the console, fingers flying over keys, eyes locked on the system readouts. The station's pulse quickened as the AI rerouted power from auxiliary systems to defense grids. Guns, shields, and defensive drones powered up, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The Xal'gar were in the station's heart now, tearing through everything in their path. He needed to buy more time. But his hands were shaking, his mind racing, a million possibilities colliding in a chaotic storm. He glanced at the reactor's status again, 9%. The clock was ticking. He was running out of options. The AI interrupted his thoughts, its voice cutting through the tension. Dorian Holt, the primary defense grid is online. However, the power output is insufficient to sustain prolonged engagement. Additional resources are required. Fine, Dorian muttered. Give me more power. Everything. I'll reroute it. But as he began reconfiguring the system, the station groaned, and a loud crack echoed through the walls. The lights flickered. A burst of static came through the comms. Dorian! Kale's voice crackled, harsh and full of static. You're running out of time. The Xal'gar are swarming the lower levels. If we don't have those shields back online, we won't make it. Dorian's pulse raced. It felt like the weight of the world was crashing down on him, but this wasn't the time to fall apart. It wasn't the time to let fear take hold. Humanity's fate, his fate, was in his hands. He was the last line of defense. Get to the central command station, Kale, Dorian said, his voice calm, steady. I'm sending you everything I've got. Get to the armory. Get the heavy guns online. Understood, Kale replied. Dorian's hands never stopped moving. He rerouted the final reserves of power into the shield grid, the hum of the station growing louder with each passing second. He was betting everything on this, on his ability to turn the tide, on his understanding of the station's systems. As the shields powered up, a deep rumbling filled the station. The hum turned into a roar, and for a moment, Dorian thought he might lose it. The AI's voice was calm, almost mechanical. Core stabilization at 5%. Attempting to initiate cooldown sequence. But the countdown was too close. 4%. 3%. Dorian's stomach churned as he glanced at the door, half expecting the walls to explode, expecting Xal'gar soldiers to burst through at any moment. Then a surge. A bright flash on the monitor. The core had stabilized, but only just. The shields flared to life. The defensive grid began firing on its own, automated systems engaging the enemy. Dorian watched as the Xal'gar ships, what was left of them, were pounded into oblivion by the station's cannons. For a brief moment, everything stopped. The flashing lights. The alarms. The chaotic systems. Dorian breathed. But only for a moment. The station was still under attack, and Dorian knew this wasn't over. The Xal'gar would find a way through. They always did. The comms crackled again. It was Kale's voice, rough and exhausted. Dorian, we're holding them off, but they're adapting. I don't know how much longer we can hold. Dorian clenched his fists. The adrenaline was wearing off, but the fight was far from over. I'll be there in a minute, he said. But first, he turned to the main console and opened the final layer of the system's core defenses. He had to make this count. His heart pounded as he reprogrammed the AI to override the system's fail-safes, take the station's remaining weapons offline, reroute the power back into the core, and set it to maximum output. The Xal'gar would not win this day. And then, he hit the button. Fire everything, Dorian whispered. #cliffhanger ending asterisk. As the station's core surged to life, the sound of an approaching enemy fleet filled the comms. Reactor at critical. Launching final offensive. Dorian's breath caught as the screen flickered. No, this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of humanity's final stand. The Xal'gar had pushed too far, and now, Dorian Holt had something more terrifying than their weapons. He had humanity's most deadly weapon, ingenuity. But just as the station's defenses primed for one last salvo, a new, even greater threat loomed on the horizon, a shadow in space, far darker than the Xal'gar could ever be. And it was coming fast. The blinding flash of light from Station Valus's weapons array lit up the darkness of space like a dying star. Dorian Holt's fingers trembled against the console as he watched the enemy fleet stagger under the barrage of fire. It was a momentary victory, a moment where it seemed like they might just stand a chance. But he knew better than to celebrate. The Xal'gar were relentless. They always adapted. The comms crackled, and Kale's voice came through, strained but filled with resolve. Dorian, they've pulled back, temporarily. But it won't last. They're regrouping. We're running out of time. Dorian's eyes were fixed on the screens, watching as the enemy ships recoiled from the station's bombardment. He wasn't fooled by their retreat. They were learning, recalibrating, preparing for the next phase of the attack. The clock was ticking, and Station Valus's core systems were still on the edge of collapse. The reactor, now fully powered and stabilized, hummed like an animal's heart, but even that pulse was fragile. The shields could only withstand so much. The station's defenses were running low on energy, and Dorian had only minutes before the system overloaded again. They needed to move fast. He pushed the thought of failure aside, refocusing on the task at hand. The Xal'gar had been too bold. They underestimated humanity. Now, with his ingenuity, Dorian had turned the station into a weapon, but it was still only a fraction of what was needed. The AI had done its job, but now, Dorian needed to push it further. "Varys, report," Dorian said, his voice steady despite the weight bearing down on him. "I'm on my way to the upper command station, holding off stragglers." "It's bad, Dorian. They've adapted quicker than we thought. We're going to need more firepower." Varys' voice was firm, but there was no hiding the fatigue in her tone. Dorian's eyes flickered to the station's weapons grid. The energy output from the reactor was barely holding, and the Xal'gar were far too close to breaching the station's inner sanctum. There was no more time to waste. He punched in a command sequence, rerouting every last ounce of power into the defense grid, pushing it past its limits. The station groaned beneath the strain, but it held. For now. "Dorian, what are you doing?" Kale's voice broke through the static again, sharper this time. "You're burning the last reserves of power. If you do that, we don't have a choice." Dorian snapped, his voice carrying the weight of every decision he'd made, every sacrifice he'd endured. "The station is our last chance. We're either going to burn out trying or go down fighting. There's no middle ground anymore." He punched the final command into the console. The station's internal weapons system, once limited, now surged with energy. A sharp hum echoed through the halls as drones, cannons, and shield generators came online, each system working in concert as if the station itself had become a living, breathing entity. The Xal'gar were going to feel this. Dorian let out a breath, eyes fixed on the readouts. He had done everything he could to turn the tide. Now, it was up to the station's final push to hold the line. The first wave of incoming Xal'gar ships took the full brunt of the station's defenses. Explosions ripped through the void as cannon fire shattered hulls, drones swarmed, and lasers streaked across the darkness. For a moment, it felt like they might actually win. Then the second wave arrived. Massive ships, their hulls dark and jagged like predators descending on prey, and Dorian felt his stomach drop. They weren't retreating. They were bringing reinforcements. The tide was about to turn again. "Dorian!" Varys' voice came over the comms again, frantic. "The perimeter's collapsing. They're too strong, too many. We're—" A blast cut her off. The signal went dead. Dorian's pulse quickened as his fingers flew over the console. A new alarm blared, louder and more urgent than ever. The shields were failing. Again. His mind raced. There had to be another way. The AI, it had to have a way to adapt, to learn. If the station could learn from the Xal'gar's tactics, it might stand a chance. The station's AI had already saved them once. If he could tap into its deeper programming, link it with the station's weapons, they might be able to create a counterattack, an adaptive defense that could learn as it fought. But it was risky. The AI wasn't designed for warfare at this scale, and it was running dangerously low on resources. Dorian slammed his fist against the console. He didn't have time to think. He had to act. "AI," he barked. "Adapt. Recalibrate. Analyze the incoming Xal'gar tactics and counteract them. I'm giving you full access. For a long moment, nothing happened. The system hummed, sluggish and heavy. Then, as if the station itself were waking up, the lights flickered and a new series of commands appeared on the screen. The AI was responding, calculating, learning, evolving. Activating adaptive warfare protocol. The station's guns adjusted. The drones reformed their attack patterns. The shield generators hummed in a new, more efficient cycle. And then the defenses changed. They shifted into new configurations, anticipating the Xal'gar's next moves before they even made them. Dorian leaned back, watching in awe as the station's weapons became a fluid, unpredictable force, dancing with the Xal'gar like an animal finally learning to strike back. For the first time, humanity was on the offensive. As the enemy ships collided with the station's renewed defenses, Dorian could feel the balance of power shift. The Xal'gar ships were faltering. They were being outsmarted. The comms crackled again, this time with a clearer voice. It was Kale, but he sounded different. Sharper. Almost relieved. Dorian, it's working, Kale said, his voice thick with disbelief. You've done it. We've pushed them back. But Dorian knew the truth. This wasn't a victory, this was a temporary reprieve. The Xal'gar would adjust again. And this time, they might not be so easily countered. He stood up, wiping the sweat from his brow, his eyes never leaving the screens. He had one more move to make. The station was holding, but they couldn't keep this up forever. Kale, Dorian said, his voice quieter now. We need to do more. I can't stop this alone. I need you to help me take out their command ship. We're not done yet. Kale's response was a sharp exhale, a quiet promise in his voice. You've got it. We'll finish this. Together. Dorian took a deep breath. There was no going back. He couldn't afford to lose now, not when humanity's future was finally within his grasp. ###twist ending asterisk. Just as Dorian prepared to send the final command to cripple the Xal'gar's fleet, a sudden burst of static filled the comms. The voice on the other end wasn't Kale's. It was Xa'gar, the Xal'gar's supreme commander. You think you've won, human? This is only the beginning. Dorian's heart stopped. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The real enemy, the one who had been pulling the strings all along, had just revealed itself. And now, the true war was about to begin. The Xal'gar had only just begun to play their hand.